Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's been a fascinating morning. I'm really impressed with the work that you've all done. And we have a wonderful opportunity to engage with some very clustered and experienced people on one of the biggest challenges, in my view, in this whole process. If we think about the data to deal pipeline, moving from vision setting through modeling all the way to investment. And what we're focused on this panel is how do we engage effectively with policymakers. And so we don't have a lot of time, but if you allow me a few seconds, just to, some reflections. In my experience at engaging with policymakers, and some of those these things have come up so far, is the policymakers don't want to talk to you. And if we're honest as academics, we don't really want to talk to the policymakers. They don't give us publications. It doesn't fit our incentives. The policymakers, especially if they're elected officials, are not often electrical engineers. And so explaining the complexity of these kinds of models to them, they don't have time for, and can be a frustrating process. They ask questions that are inconvenient, right? How many jobs will this create? What happens if we double our hydrogen industry? Things we haven't modeled, and so we don't have answers for, and that's irritating. And some of the questions take time to answer. We've got to go away and do another 3 to 5 weeks of modeling. In the meantime, they lose interest and we start again. They don't want to talk to us. We've got to, and so that can be frustrating. And then the policymaker will demand more gas in the system. And 2 days after we publish our study, NGO will take us to task in the press because we've got too much gas in our study. All right. And so these are the kinds of frustrations and complexities that we come up against once we start engaging other people with our models. And so these are the questions I hope that our panel can reflect on. And what are the kind of big policy barriers? What kind of policy reforms do we need? How do we go about engaging with policymakers? And it involves a lot of trust, particularly if we think about the sort of understanding and the complexity of the models. The policymaker doesn't have 3 weeks to go on a training course to understand the complexity, and so they have to trust you. And that's a big challenge in building these kinds of relationships. So with that kind of setting, I'm going to ask the panelists to kind of really give us their career highlights. We could probably spend an hour with each of the panelists, but we've got about 3 to 5 minutes with each of the panelists. That's your challenge and your constraint. But I'm going to start with Yuba Sukona. Yuba leads the Africa Institute for Sustainable Energy Systems Analysis, which is an emerging African network of academics aiming to promote independent African-led research on climate transition challenges. Yuba, in your opinion, how can academia influence policymakers to improve the policy environment and energy transitions? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving the opportunity to get to this conversation. And as you already indicated, ICESA is in the making. It was born just from a simple but powerful observation. Africa cannot afford to rely on external blueprints or imported expertise and to shape its energy future. All the morning, we have seen a wealth of expertise in the continent and from different countries and different areas. And the continent's also development challenges are unique, and so are in its opportunities. The tools, data, and narratives, and that drive energy decision have too often been shaped elsewhere with very limited grounding in the African reality. And this is a fact. And that's why we created the African Institute for Sustainable Energy and System Analysis as a African-led institution. And you indicated also in the morning there was discussion, a divide between the Francophone and the Anglophone. And this is a Pan-African approach, dedicated, first of all, transforming how we think about, this is very important, how we plan, and then how we implement energy decisions on the continent. Our goals is to bridge critical gaps in system level analysis, in locally rooted expertise, and in the ability to align energy strategies with development and climate goals. We are looking at energy for development, because there is no way you can improve the quality of life and the well-being of the people without addressing the fundamental issue of energy. We want to emphasize three main areas and then three main pillars. And then the first one is developing robust African-specific energy paths that reflect local priorities. And the problem is also that has to be written in institutions, not only experts. You know, the biggest problem is that need to be rooted in institutions at the national level. And then the second area is to building African capacity and institutions. And then the capacity within the institution, because you may have thousands of modelers in the continent, if there's no institution through which they can operate, and then things will not move in the right direction. And then the third area is creating a trusted and independent space for system analysis and dialogue. And then to make sure that there is a navigation between the three key actors at the national level: the policymakers, the practitioner, and then the knowledge base. And then those are the academia, and then to bring those different elements together. And then you may indicate why, actually, what makes ICS different is that it is not extension of external institution. And then we made an innovation in ICESA because it made of wide range of experts from all over the world. We do not need, and then we take a benefit of what we learn from some of the good things we learned from the COVID. And then we can work together remotely. As I'm speaking in Bamako, I am with you in Addis Ababa, and we can do that. And then it was also conceived by the African for Africa with a firm commitment to Pan-African inclusion, both Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone, Spanish phone, and to policy relevance rather than academic abstraction. Because what we are doing, the work we will be doing is to inform policy, and then to support policy, and then to support action. It is not only academic papers. And ultimately, our ambition is to help Africa to lead with its own voice, its own tools, and its own vision in the global energy and climate conversation. And we believe that Africa can pioneer pathways and then to sustainable energy that are not only resilient with inclusive, but also models of innovation for the rest of the world. And then those are some of the things just I wanted to highlight. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you. Very interesting. I mean, the elements of trust and local knowledge and understanding the context and building those frameworks into your modeling, critical things. I'm going to quickly turn to Asima Vitima from the Danish Energy Agency. The DEA provide a lot of technical support in a range of countries across Africa. I guess from your experience, what do you see as the kind of policy roadblocks? Like, where do you when you finish these modeling exercises, what do you run up against? What are the core challenges, and what are the kinds of tricks of the trade in getting to implementation? Thanks.
Thank you so much, and very happy to be here. Maybe just half a minute of intro. So I'm Asima Vitina with the Danish Energy Agency. The reason I'm here is because Denmark is a partner country to the Accelerated Partnership for Renewables in Africa, also known as APRA. And one of our African partners is Rwanda, and we were very happy to support CCG to help the Rwandan very committed drive to really increase their local capacity for energy modeling in the country. Now, before I go into the discussion topic, and I think it's a really, really crucial question. I think, unfortunately, for all of us modelers, and I could count myself one as well for a good 10 years in my murky past, a very well-developed energy plan, as fantastic as it might be, it's an absolutely necessary element, but unfortunately it's not a sufficient element to ensure actual projects. Now, I will somewhat delimit my intervention here to focus on commercial renewable investments and why maybe we see too few of them on the African soil. Now, the starting point would be to acknowledge that, as everywhere else in the world, you would need private investment for large renewable projects to take place in Africa. Now, in many countries, that would be the first time ever that you would have successful IPPs, so private investors coming in and building out the renewable capacity. And what is particularly important is that if this is the first time this is done, they will be extremely risk conscious. So one really needs to make sure that the conditions, the framework for investment does not scare off the skittish investors, especially lenders. Now, maybe just as a metaphor, imagine, and here we're kind of looking from the perspective of a developer. You have some money you're willing to invest, and you have several roads to choose. And those could be different countries, different markets they could enter. There are some roads that are fully illuminated. There might be some curves, there could be some bumps, but you see them well ahead. And there are some roads where there's thick fog. And you don't know if there's going to be bumps, if there's going to be a steep turn, so you can't go fast, or if you're just going to end up in a ditch. And this is what the policy framework should do. It should try to remove the fog. We can try to do that with energy planning, make sure it's long term, but then it's up to the policymakers to make sure that it's stable, that is transparent, and that there is visibility. And I think there's a very good example from Botswana that actually has all of the fundamentals in place. They have financially viable utility. They have very decent credit rating, I think the best in Africa. But in their renewable auctions that they launched, I think they wanted to secure 500 megawatts. They could only land 50 megawatts at the time. And that was because the political goals, they kept changing. It was like chasing a moving target. First there was focus on concentrated solar power, then there was PV, then there was IPP, then there was PPP, and that is just not good enough in terms of covering your risks as an investor. So one very important element, political stability. Now, when we start looking at the very operational ways, how do you get from energy plan to investment? What are the means to do that? And increasingly, those would be renewable energy auctions. Yes, there can be negotiated contracts, but to be honest, the fundamentals will be the same. It is all about ensuring that all the unfair, quote unquote, risks are covered. So imagine if you're a developer, you're building your solar park, and then the transmission gets delayed. So you're done, you've invested a lot of money, you could generate, but you cannot transmit. Should this risk be on you? Should you be still receiving money, or should you be incurring losses? If the consumers, the end consumers of electricity, stop paying their bills, should you still be compensated, or are you still generating and just giving away your power for free? There are lots and lots of elements in this. And unfortunately, the chain will only be as strong as its weakest link. It's enough for one critical element in, let's say, a power purchase agreement to be risky, and the whole thing can fall through. Now, what many auction regimes have taught us is that, and this is the second element, to get a good auction regime, you need to do a lot of homework. You need to identify all those elements and really spend resources before you start, because a failed initial auction regime can really bite you in the long run. So the second point I would say is serious homework and do the prep work in time. And third, and I'll wrap up soon, is if there was one single element that would be fantastic to really sort out for the majority of African countries is financially viable utilities or off-takers. I believe World Bank was giving an estimate that more than a half of African utilities actually could not recoup all their costs and hence make necessary investments and maybe even pay their dues to the producers because they could not collect enough revenue from the people actually using the electricity. Now, it's a very complex question, and of course there should be affordability built into this, but it should not come at the expense of making the utility financially non-viable. So just to wrap up, make a plan and commit to it, keep it stable. Second, do your homework and prepare in good time. And third, by all means, try to make sure your utilities are financially viable. Thank you.
Resonating messages. I mean, I guess for us as a modeling community, the messages I take from that is it's not just energy policy that counts. There's a whole bunch of other policy issues around finance, around political stability that are important. And you have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of all of the people in the value chain. How does an investor think about this? How does a project developer think about this? What do they need to know? Have I provided that kind of information? So jumping on to Sebastian from the European Commission, obviously the European Commission is a major partner in a lot of infrastructure programs across Africa. How do you see energy modeling as a tool in decision-making and in thinking about energy policy? And in particular, what are the implications for EU-Africa collaboration? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the question. Before I answer, let me just also from my side congratulate all the participants on their training, commend the organizers for organizing this event. Thank you very much. It's highly appreciated. And on a personal note, I'm very happy to be back in Addis Ababa, where I lived for several years. So, Selezi Batam Desilenyal. Now, what's the European Commission's interest in this kind of energy modeling initiatives? In fact, at the Commission, we already rely on internal energy modeling initiatives to provide analytical input to policy initiatives for the EU's own energy transition planning, aligned, for example, with the long-term target to become a net zero emissions continent or economy by mid-century. But the European Union is not an island. We have neighboring regions, neighboring countries, and we have energy-related relationships, among other interactions with many of them. Just simple examples, the EU is a net importer of gas from Algeria, but a net exporter of electricity to Morocco through Spain, among many other examples and many other future potential such interactions. So energy modeling studies are not only crucial for, let's say, modeling how the EU internal energy system will develop or could develop, but also to investigate how such interlinkages with other countries and other regions may or could develop in the future. So we have an interest in using these kind of long-term planning tools, including the long-term optimization, capacity expansion models, as well as more short-term dispatch modeling, to study cost-optimal transition pathways, which include those linkages with other regions. For example, right now, an important question that is being worked on is to find out which interconnectors between the EU and Africa, so we're talking high voltage subsea cables, may be worth the investment, aside from the Spain-Morocco one that we already have, and how they would best be used. Which country would be importing, which country would be exporting on a net basis? We don't know yet. And current opinions on that are divided. So we absolutely need these energy modeling tools to give concrete indications of which projects would be worth the investment and which ones would be a waste of taxpayers' money. Now, let's say that's the immediate neighborhood where we can interconnect with, but there's also a wider interest in energy transition across the African continent, for example, through the EU-Africa Global Gateway Investment Package, where the EU is supporting African countries with billions worth of investment, among other things, for accelerating the green transition. So, for example, the EU has an overall vision of supporting the deployment of at least 50 gigawatts of additional renewable electricity generation capacity across the African continent by 2030, and providing at least 100 million people with access to electricity by that time. And those initiatives are further strengthened by recent partnerships between the EU and, for example, the World Bank's Mission 300. In that context, the EU also supports energy modeling initiatives that are centered on the African context. Earlier today, Thierry already mentioned the African Continental Power Systems Master Plan, developed by AUDANEPA, the African Union Development Agency, where the EU was a staunch supporter and provider of funding, supporting several energy modeling studies that formed the backbone of that master plan, as well as capacity building, enabling capacity building with African Union, as well as the various African power pools. And as Thierry said, I was one of the trainers in that initiative, and Thierry started as a trainee and then became a trainer. So we have strong interests in looking at what happens on the African continent as such in terms of energy transition. Aside from that, there's various other relevant initiatives. There's, for example, the Africa-EU Energy Partnership, AEEP, which is a dialogue platform on energy transition challenges. The EU is co-funding programs like Get Transform, which assists energy sector planning in several target countries, as well as Get Invest, which mobilizes clean energy investment in target countries. Plus then, as Fitzum already mentioned, various research projects that focus on energy transitions across the African continent. So to conclude, all of those initiatives that are ongoing have benefited and will keep benefiting from this invaluable input from energy modeling, and even more important, energy modelers, which are all of you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, if I can be the political provocateur, I mean, one of the big things that are happening here is a change in diplomatic power over time. And so as Africa grows, as we will provide the world with productive labor, we'll provide the world with critical minerals, we'll provide the world with carbon sequestration services, and so the balance of political power is kind of shifting globally, and we see that, and so these kinds of relationships that we must build with Europe, who will be our future markets, and other places in the world, are a key part of the sort of big political debate. And you can't get investment and discussion going without solid numbers and solid data, which is what you all provide. Okay, so jumping into a sort of rapid fire session with people you know quite well, from institutions you know quite well. I want to sort of basically ask the same kind of question to each of the next speakers, just reflecting on their experience in Africa in particular. What are the kind of policy bottlenecks that they encounter? And again, this kind of tricks of the trade of how do you get past them towards implementation of energy plans, providing as many African country examples as you can. And I'm going to start with Alamayu from the WRI. Thanks.
Thank you. So my name is Alamayu, working with the WRI as JS analyst in the Energy Access Explorer. So this is my second time to be a trainer in the Energy Access Explorer tool. EAE was started in 2019 in 3 prototype geographies, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. And we are expanding to other geographies. Now we have a platform in Ethiopia, Nigeria, and DRC is in the pipeline. We don't have this global or even subnational, regional platform, because we want to engage first with key institutions in each country, like the energy ministries, the utilities, the academicians, and other stakeholders. Before establishing this platform, if it's important within these countries, then we will try to apply this in terms of establishing working groups for data updates that's coming from the different institutions, and identifying potential use cases, which I can mention in the case of Ethiopia for results-based financing to identify off-grid areas for solar home systems. In Kenya for county energy planning, especially in Makueni County, it is because of the Energy Act in Kenya, we are able to support counties in the development of energy plans up to the implementation stage, developing even a prospectus for investment, and identifying electricity requirements for healthcare facilities in Uganda, and also clean energy scenarios in mini-grid development in Tanzania. So the bottlenecks we have faced in before intervening in these areas in most countries is the top-down planning. So the plan is already, the policy is already there. So we are trying to intervene in some of these implementation areas. But because of this top-down planning, local communities and private sectors are not usually engaged in the planning. So later on, there could be some resistance or buy-in from this. One of the missing link in the energy planning is also the financing institutions. So later on, they don't prioritize these implementation projects from the energy sector. And we are focusing on capacity building because there is a limited capacity in most of these institutions to sustain this energy planning and the implementation. And it's not a one-time capacity building, it's a capacity development that's required for a longer period of time. I think this would be enough from my side. Yeah.
Excellent. I appreciate the brevity, but a critical point there. Planning is an inclusive process. You can't do it on your own in a room somewhere. You have to be working with stakeholders across the value chain, from communities all the way through to the investors, which of course you've heard from CCGI all week. But it's good to hear it from sort of people working on the ground. I'm going to shift quickly then to Daniel from the IEA, who I think is with us online.
Yes, thank you so much, Steve. And very happy to be here today. And it's always great to be amongst CCG colleagues and counterparts here. So I think I'm going to focus my remarks on, where do we go from after planning? So the IEA is working closely with CCG on this thing called the data deal pipeline. And I'm working personally with our colleagues at FCDO on a step around policies, which is the theme today. So obviously planning is the foundation. A lot of those modeling inputs are helpful to finesse, understand a lot of other policymaking decisions and inform those processes. But we also know that it's not just you have a plan and you go out and implement it. There are other challenges that all policymakers are going to face in that, and obviously having strong analytical backing to push forward those arguments, to understand the nuance, the trade-offs of different policy approaches is really important to be able to make sure they are successfully delivered. Maybe a few examples to give here. We know tariff setting, both on the electricity side and for other fuels, notably around clean cooking, is a very critical portion to making any investment or entry into a market attractive for the private sector. And so setting those regulations on pricing, which are also very important from the affordability aspect, and making sure people are able to use that energy. Those without access can actually meaningfully use those connections today. So in terms of that, if you're implementing those tariffs, there's something you need to understand in terms of those trade-offs between affordability and the fiscal burdens of those. And this is something that modeling bases that exist today, including new tools the IEA is putting out, can help governments understand those trade-offs and best balance it to maximize access and usage of life-changing energy, but also making sure this doesn't become an unsustainable drag on finances. And also considering what are the dimensions in terms of tax revenue, of changes to VAT, which is something that's a hot topic right now in many parts of Africa, and thinking about those dynamics there, and also how to make sure you're providing sufficient returns if you're thinking about deregulating your utilities. So this is a suite of modeling tools that can be explored in the future that can inform those policymaking processes. Maybe another example here is around land use. The development of these different projects and identifying where to put them is not just a matter of understanding where the resources are and where existing infrastructure is today, but we also see many projects that are moving forward and facing challenges around land use, around new and evolving flood risk and floodplains, and trying to make sure that you have and can inform, for instance, if you are setting up a tendering process, as our colleagues in the DEA highlighted, making sure that you are identifying where those are best put, not just from an energetic economics basis, but also thinking into the future about exposure to new natural hazard risks, as well as also potential contestation if it is in a biodiversity hotspot or other area that could be sensitive. So I think these are some of the other dimensions that the IEA is also bringing new tools to bear to be able to help with these kinds of assessments. And I think this is my charge to many of the people who are working on building energy models and using them to think about what are these kinds of tools that can help inform and ease the policy implementation process and the design, as well as also for those who are working in Africa today to identify what are some of the key barriers in implementation where these analytical tools could be most helpful to move from just planning to this implementation considerations as well. So I'll leave it at that, but thank you so much for the time.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure how thrilled the room is to hear that there are a whole bunch of new tools that you have to learn, having just spent 3 weeks learning one set of tools. But I think
one step at a time.
Exactly. I think the message that you can't answer these policy questions with one tool is very clear, and so you need to be collaborating with other modeling groups. I think the message on financing is quite key from the IEA, but I also love this point that the policymakers are in the same kind of boat you are. They're going into an environment that's uncertain, where there's multiple different perspectives, a lot of different political objectives, and you can actually support them by providing data that sort of clarifies these trade-offs, so that they can be more confident in their roles, and that helps build trust. So then jumping on to Thierry from Irina.
Yes, so good afternoon once again, everyone. So my name is Thierry Odun. I work for Arena in the Innovation and Technology Center based in Bonn. And I work mainly in the energy planning and power sector transformation team. So basically, given the wider membership, as you all know, for Arena, we have around 170 countries, and we have around 14 countries that are yet to join Arena. So we have quite a wide membership, and given that we have been working very closely with many African countries and supporting them in developing comprehensive energy plan. And beyond that, we have been supporting different power pools, the 5 power pools in Africa. And most recently, we have been working at the continental level with the African Union Development Agency, with one of the key projects funded by also with the support of the European Union. So as Arena, as a modeling partner, we support the other NEPAD and the 5 power pool to develop the first continental master plan, and out of which some priority projects are identified. And these priority projects are going to feed into the 3rd phase, where bankable pipeline project is going to be developed and some financing is going to be mobilized. So beyond that, beyond capacity building, training, supporting countries, even the continent, in developing a comprehensive energy plan, we also have some network whereby we allow countries to come and share their experiences through the LTS network, and we allow North-South, South-North sharing of experience, and also South-to-South experience. And this allows countries and planners to actually see what other countries are doing and to share practices. And beyond that, we also try, giving our platform, to have some investment forum across the continent and beyond in different regions to actually create the matchmaking between developers and also the financiers. So given this platform that Arena have, we try as much as possible to kind of linking both the developers and the financiers so that actually things can move on in the continent of Africa. And as well know, I mean, we've been seeing that actually over the last 20 years, Africa has received less than 10% of overall investment in renewable energy, while the continent still needs energy to close the electricity access gap and many other challenges. So given the experience working with the different government and ministries and at the national, regional, and continental level, we see many things beyond giving the energy plan. And one of the aspects I would like to focus on is that already, I mean, my colleague from the Energy Agency already touched upon, is about finance. We see mainly that there's an issue around financing guarantees and also currency risks. For instance, if we zoom a little bit in the case of Western Africa, we have a kind of dual monitoring systems. We have the Western Africa Western Africa Economic Monitoring Union, called UEMOA, which is mainly the French speaking country. They have one currency, and this currency kind of backed with the euros and it kind of fixed exchange rate all the time. And this provides for investors a kind of visibility, right? A kind of stability and a real value of return of their project. While you have other countries in Western Africa, like Nigeria or Ghana or the Gambia that have different currency, and those countries are very they face severe fluctuations. And over the last few years, you can see in Nigeria, the currency has dropped for from 20 to 40% depreciation. And this does not provide appetite for investors to come into the country to invest in developing large scale projects. And so that's why we see actually that beyond the energy plan and the policy, there should be a need of country to kind of clarify or provide more transparent, be transparent in the policy of how currency risk in terms of convertibility, transferability can be covered. And also there should be the role also of the African Development Bank or MDBs in terms of providing partial guarantee in order to cover these kind of currency risk issues. One thing that also I would like to highlight is also the lack of harmonized regulations in the region. I think if you have harmonized regulation, this will help investors to not to deal with individual countries, but knowing that the rule or the process is the same, then I can move quicker. So this will remove administrative bottlenecks and also speed up a lot the scale of project that we implement across the continent. And the third aspect I would like to really emphasize is also lack of implementing regulation and policy. I mean, over the years, I think many countries in Africa have done a lot of work in developing policy, targets, energy planning, etc. But what we see that is lacking, after the energy plan and policy, there is a second phase that needs to be there. We need to be able to crystallize this energy plan or policy into concrete implementing processes. For instance, when you set a target or set certain thing, you need to be able to set who is going to be in charge, where the money should come from, who's going to do that. So this kind of element are missing, and that's why some of the things are slow. Even the government, you see different agencies are fighting, not knowing who is going to take this role, who's going to do that. And I think this is the next step that many African countries need to develop, like kind of have a very clear process where who's going to do what, who's going to mobilize finance, and etc. I think this will help a long way in mobilize finance and kind of bridging this low investment going into the continent. Last but not least, I think Arena is also is champion energy planning globally, and then one of the initiative that we are kind of working closely is the Global Coalition of Energy Planning, and we hope to this kind of network also disseminate best practices and some of the things that we mentioned here. So I think I will stop there. So one of the key points I mentioned is trying to have currency risk guarantees, harmonized regulation in the regional zones, and also implementing, have like a second layer of implementing regulation and policy, identify who's going to do what, and I think it will help to push things forward in the continent. Thank you.
Excellent. I think you're all probably experiencing the same as me. Every speaker just ratchets up the complexity a little bit more. We've got global geopolitics, we've got regional geopolitics, we've got local process issues. But I think this point you made about understanding process and who's accountable for what sort of step in the implementation layer is really important. It also helps you understand who do you need to be engaging with in terms of giving them the right kind of data and information. Excellent stuff. So then I'm going to hand over to Jessica from the IAEA, who is online. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much also for the invitation to contribute. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. And my apologies for not being able to attend this important meeting in person. Unfortunately, our team is a little bit short-staffed at the moment, and it was unplanned. So my apologies. I also want to say congratulations to the students. You can see that there's been a lot of hard work over the past few weeks, and there were really excellent presentations this morning. So. And now about the topic of the panel and the examples of policy bottlenecks. What I can say is that for the IEA, I won't be able to give specific examples on specific countries. It's not really considered, let's say, appropriate for me to do so, but I can speak more generally about our general experience in policy bottlenecks and without naming specific countries. But also just some background information about what the work that the IEA does in terms of capacity building. We're providing support to our member states in energy systems analysis, providing them with the ability to acquire their own knowledge and know how to analyze their own systems. But then the implementation is the responsibility of the member state. After the capacity building program is completed, the IEA provides ongoing technical support as needed, but the country itself is actually implementing. So we're not overseeing that aspect of it. And it's important to note that there's obviously a lag from when capacity building programs are realized to when implementation actually takes place. And of course, this can be challenging then to monitor and follow up how energy plans are actually implemented. Nevertheless, given all these years of experience in capacity building, I can speak to some more general examples of what we've observed over the years. I think colleagues from the Danish Energy Agency and also Arena already picked up on some of these issues, but this lack of laws and regulations is really a major bottleneck because they take years to develop. You can have, for example, renewable projects that are needing new infrastructure, but who will pay for this infrastructure and how will the costs be estimated? I know of a country that has solar PV projects that are waiting to be connected to the grid, but the methodology to estimate the connection costs, it cannot be agreed between the operator, the grid operator, the regulator, and the utility. And this is an ongoing issue in a country that we've worked with. And so you can have, for example, domestic customers who could cover the costs. This could be estimated, but then how much would the utility earn when generation is being made, but there is very low demand? So who would pay for this and how much? And then also, if you're going to export this power, is it really fair to have domestic customers pay for this infrastructure when the utility is making money from customers abroad? So you can see this can be quite a major bottleneck. And what we've seen now is that initially the government was merely observing what is taking place, but now they're taking a more active role in this issue, and we're expecting that this will be resolved relatively soon. But without this political will or active engagement of the government, this could be really a major sort of confounding factor for implementation. The IEA also works on regional projects, and this is very important because this helps countries to unlock affordable projects and also address spatial distribution. So you can have a country that has very rich in energy resources, but relatively low demand. And then working in a regional collaboration would mean that this country could then redistribute these energy resources to another country that could benefit from it, where they have high demand but low resources. But of course, you need to have countries that are willing to collaborate and share expertise. And we have seen over the years that in some cases, due to historical, political, and social issues, that countries are not necessarily willing to do so. So this can also be a confounding factor in terms of energy planning implementation. And finally, I would say that stakeholder engagement and communication of the modeling results doesn't always get the recognition of the challenges that you face as modelers, and being able to present your results in an understandable way so that they will be usefully applied by the policymakers. This can also be a confounding factor. I think with that, I'll stop, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Some excellent points. I think this point about being able to communicate your results in an accessible way is really key, but also political will is a resource, and how do we think about that in our modeling? I mean, how many of you have modeled these ideas that Jessica raised about how long it takes to get the regulation framework in place? You might have build-out times, but you haven't factored in how long does it take to build the skills? How do we model the timing between supply and demand and how that impacts finance? So some really interesting things to ponder there. Last person in our panel, who probably Surely there's nothing left to say, is Andreas from EC4All. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of good points have already been made. I'm Andreas Sahlberg. I'm from EC4All, where I work at the Integrated Energy Planning team. We provide technical assistance for energy access planning. And even before this, I was in academia. So for the last 8 years, probably, I worked with least cost geospatial electrification models to support planning efforts. I would say one of the key challenges, so we want to do these models, develop these plans. The key things to do this and then get to actual connections in an as efficient manner as possible is probably to be very clear about inclusion, transparency, and coordination in the whole planning process. So if we look at providing access to electricity in countries, I mean, we need to involve many different organizations. It's the ministry, it's the power utility, the rural electrification agency, the private sector that's often involved in the off-grid, the international development organizations. So if we develop a plan, we need to make sure to include all of these different organizations in the planning process. So I'll give the example of Mozambique. So Mozambique, in the government, in the ministry, they started a planning and coordination unit in the beginning of last year. This planning and coordination unit actually attended the Energy Modeling Platform for Africa last year in Ghana, where they learned to use the onset model to do their updated least cost electricity access plan. It's a very intense training, this one, for 2 weeks. They spent probably the next 6 months collecting and improving the data, rerunning the model to come up with the best possible scenarios they could. Now, for the last 6 months, they have been doing stakeholder engagements, showing the model, the results, all of the inputs used to all of these different organizations that have to be on board and aligned on a single plan. It's a very challenging task because every different organization might have different mandates, different interests. They want to see different things in the results. So it's iterations and iterations of explaining how the model does, that it's a data-driven decision process or planning process, but also collecting all of the feedback on assumptions, on inputs from all the different organizations to try and get everyone aligned and actually believing in this plan, because otherwise everyone will do their own thing. So I'll leave it at that.
Very powerful points to raise there, and disappointed to hear that after these models were built in this program, we have to do more work. That's I did not expect. So 6 months of further data collection and improving the model. It's an interesting timeline for us, and another 6 months of stakeholder engagement. And just as an illustration, running a national program in the past, I had to give the same presentation 100 times. All right, because everybody has to hear it, everybody has to understand it. You just got to get out there and do it and do it and do it. It was very boring. But I think the message about clear, inclusive, transparent, coordinated planning is probably the highlight of the panel for me. So hopefully we've got some time for some questions. Not getting objections from the bosses, so let's proceed. Any questions from the audience for this very interesting panel? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the panelists, and it's great to have all these power broker institutions, global key stakeholders in this modeling and planning process. So I just want to hear your opinions on strategies, because you have almost the power to pool resource, financial resource, personnel skills for this modeling activity, because almost all trainers have come from this big global international organizations like yours, right? So how do you see or any strategies to enhance and foster this close collaborations between modelers, academia, even this alumni with the policy makers institutions, so that we will have like strong and impactful long-term policy, let's say, contributions in the different countries. Thank you.
Is there anyone in particular you want to answer that question?
Unfortunately, and perhaps for everyone, because these are, the big financiers and providers of different high-level technical personnel.
Okay, I don't think we have time for everybody to respond, but is there anyone who would like to respond to that question?
I'm trying.
Yeah, please.
So one of the way that at Arena we have been trying to support, trying to go beyond, because if you understand like the way Arena works, we actually represent member countries. So we work very closely with government and ministries, and we actually acknowledge the fact that we need to go beyond them. We need to involve the civil society, the academia, and so on. And recently we have been working very closely with CCG. And last year we signed an MOU with them so that we actually, through CCG, also reach out to the academia in this whole planning process. So this is one of the ways Arena is doing to kind of reaching out more beyond the government side.
And maybe Yuba, if you're still online, you might want to respond and just talk about how African institutions can collaborate better.
Yeah, it's not only to collaborate better, is to make sure that, competences are at national level, because the decisions, activities, and planning is at national level. And there is no way you can have a long-term perspective if they are not rooted at national level. And in each of the countries, and to make sure that there is a dialogue between the policy, the practice, and the knowledge institutions. And actually, there is a big divide. There are very few cases where, all the modelers have any interaction with the policymakers. And there is very few, a part of some specific project, if there is any interaction between those who are in the field, those who are in the practice, and then the knowledge community, there is disconnect, and that will take time. It cannot happen overnight. It requires endurance, it requires long-term vision. And then we need really, and then to use all the opportunities that exist actually. And you see, look at the panel, and then different institutions. And then if you look at the African case, which institution are, in the similar or are likely to be like those international institutions in the continent. And that requires also that the help of all of them to make sure that strong and good institutions are in a continent, and so that they can make a better use of all the tools and all the training, and then that is happening through CCG and others.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this message of your job is not over is clear, right? You've now got to go and decide, who needs to know this information? Where can I get additional training? Who do I need to partner with, and kind of drive this yourself? And make sure that you're working with similar kinds of institutions. Are there any, maybe one more question from the floor for the rest of the panel, and then we'll wrap up? Anyone? Okay, there's one there. Thank you. Go ahead, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. My name is David. I'm from Addis Ababa University. Thank you for a great panel. I have one question regarding these political targets for electrification, mostly in Africa. We set these very ambitious electrification targets to have universal electricity access by 2025, by 2030. And at the end of the day, when the time comes, we don't achieve them due to different reasons. And I'm asking the panelists whether this is a good thing, whether it undermines the electrification process. If we don't implement them, then is there something that needs to come before having these plans? Terry was mentioning about having these implementation programs, having these different mandates and accountabilities between different institutions. And is it a good thing that we set these ambitious targets in Africa?
Yeah, thank you. Very carefully phrased question there. Does anybody want to respond? Otherwise, I can call on some people.
I'm very happy to jump in. Sorry.
All right, Dan, you go first.
All right. I think this is a very excellent question. I do think that there is a tension here that we all need to figure out how to balance in our own political context, because obviously ambition is key. You need to be setting targets that you know are a reach for it to be sort of something that you want to achieve and be able to rally support around. That said, I do think that sometimes overly ambitious plans or ones that are dogmatic about a certain sort of symbolic target can undercut things. One great example of this is when if I'm an investor and I'm looking at these scenarios and this ambition is too high, I then lack a sort of credible benchmark or baseline for how much demand I can really realistically expect from these different things going forward. And so oftentimes that means that, they either have to come up with their own projections, or they have to, if they base it on that and they have unrealistic sort of financials, it gets to the financier, they look at it and they say, I don't believe that this amount of demand is going to be coming from these low-income households that are going to be connected in the next 5 years. We've seen from our own data that when most households get interconnected, they consume 1/5 or less than the average household. And so if you're using sort of these wrong assumptions or overly ambitious ones, it can really actually either hurt the investment case, or if the investment goes forward and it fails, it then it reflects on the overall investment environment and scares off some investors. So I think that there's a balance here that needs to be there. And I do think that you're seeing a trend, even in the context of something, let's say like Mission 300, where some of the most vocal champions for certain causes, let's say Tanzania in this case, are setting targets that are not consistent with SDG 7, for instance. So they have meeting their 80% of clean cooking access by 2034. And I think that even that sends a strong signal that people are sort of shifting the needle in the direction of travel there to try and set something that's ambitious, but they know is also attainable. So I think there is a balancing act there, and we're seeing it shift, especially as we get closer in particular to the SDG 7 deadline.
Yeah, thank you. Sima?
Yes, and I fully agree with all of the sentiments expressed here. So I'll just try to add one very brief kind of maybe more technical mechanism underneath all this. So if it's a bit like your friends keep inviting you to dinner parties and you just fail to show up time after time after time, and then they'll stop inviting you at some point. So, I mean, imagine the same about those, let's say, power demand projections. If time after time after time those are not met, then people will just stop believing those. Now, why it is important that people, especially investors, start believing in those, especially if they're quite far looking and quite ambitious, is how you develop your supply chains. Now, an investor will only start making really sizable investments in a specific country or region if they see a pipeline that is of sizable volume and that is believable. Now, if every time you're just doing some ad hoc projects, one downside, because you don't believe the projections, or you're kind of just doing opportunistic investment, then unfortunately the region might not have the opportunity to have all those extra jobs from supply chain being localized in the country, and there might also not come a learning learning curve effect on the prices of those technologies and products coming down. So I do believe there is a very financial cost to constantly delivering plans that are actually not accurate. Thank you.
I think it's a very interesting point to wrap up with, the idea that your targets and your goals to be believable are dependent on the believability of the rest of your system. right? Does the value chain exist? Does the policy framework exist? Do the financial institutions exist? That's a very interesting thing to think about. If you will allow me one last comment from sort of learning from my career so far, is in how you tell these energy transition stories, all of the stakeholders need to find themselves in that story. If that makes sense, right? So if you exclude someone from your transition story from the onset, from how you've structured the scenarios, from how you've described the scenario, you've basically failed at that kind of inclusive process. And sometimes it takes quite a lot of humility to understand why people think the way they do and why they propose a certain way forward, which also enriches the process. So thank you very much to the panelists. That was super interesting. As I said, I wish we had an hour with each of you. Thanks to you online for joining us. And we'll hand over to the next panel. Thank you, everyone.